This world is an illusion.
Hello everyone! I have been looking forward to share with you the build I've been working on. This build can do both juice tier 16 maps and melt uber bosses like their map bosses, and that is for less than 100 divines. There is no mage blood or mirror weapon needed, although you could improve the build a lot by spending more. As the title implies, the entire concept of this build is centered around making use of Light Poacher and the spirit charges it creates. In particular, we focus on this mod that says gain 5% of physical damage as extra damage of each element per spirit charge. That's the core of how we hyperscale damage with this build. I know people have used Light Poacher already for this mechanic. However, this build works uniquely as we keep our spirit charges maxed at all times, even during uber bosses, by not triggering spirit bursts. The damage can go to 100 million shaper DPS and above with ethereal knives. And that's even without curses or any buff you have to press. The only thing you'll have to press is EK and Writhing Jar. I think this mechanic is massively underlooked and it can really scale to an absurd degree. And it's also really, really fun. So here's how the build works. Whenever we kill anything, we get a spirit charge. As you can see right here, we have 14 right now after having killed some mobs and a little more coming in. So each spirit charge gets us 5% of physical damage as extra damage of each element, which means 15% of physical damage as extra damage per spirit charge. Because the number of maximum spirit charges is determined by the amount of abyss jewels we have, we stack as many of those jewels as possible. Right now, we have stacked a total of 21 abyss jewels between gear, so all of those have abyss jewels, and the passive tree. So throughout all of our passive tree, we grabbed all of the jewel sockets, and we grabbed some cluster jewels as well, with some jewel sockets right here. At the top some more, one more socket here, one more here, another cluster jewel. That means that if we keep 21 spirit charges up at all times, and we can, I'll explain how to in a second, we get 315% of physical damage as extra elemental damage just from this one line on the helmet. That's a 4 times damage multiplier. It's insane. So to maintain maximum spirit charges up at all times, we have to both avoid triggering Spirit Burst, which uses a spirit charge every time you use a skill, and we have to get a kill at least every 10 seconds to refresh the duration of the charges. To do this, we put a mana cost on Spirit Burst with Archmage support, and we drain our mana to 0 constantly with the Agnostic Keystone right here. As you can see, it continuously drains more mana than we can regen. This way, Spirit Burst will never be able to trigger, and we can keep all of our charges without having to worry. Then we reduce the mana cost of Ethereal Knives to 0, and it can be any physical spell skill as well. To do this, we have first 100% uptime on a Bismuth Flask that has 25% mana cost craft with 25% increased effect, and then we get 5% increased effect from Careful Conservationist right here on the tree. So in total, that amounts to 32% reduced mana cost at all times. And second, we use Divergent Inspiration. Then third, we have 5% reduced mana cost craft on both rings and the amulet. And fourth, we anoint Tireless on the amulet for an extra reduced mana cost of 6%. And so in the end, all of this reduces the mana cost of our spell to 0, and Spirit Burst never triggers. And we can free cast without having to worry about mana. To be able to keep our Bismuth Flask with reduced mana cost up at all times, we use the Trader Keystone right here, and we get it with a Brutail Restraint of Balbala Timeless Jewels, which I socketed here. And we leave 2 flask slots empty at all times to make sure that we get enough charges. What this also allows us to do, and this is the next important part, is to generate charges at all times for our Writhing Jar, which we can use on bosses every 6-7 seconds to make sure that all of our charges are kept up between phases. This means we can keep our 21 spirit charges up at all times, regardless of the situation, which then is how this build is able to do bosses rather than being restricted to only mapping. Another cool thing with this build, and it's my favorite part, is that the more charges you build, with 7 power, 4 frenzy, and 4 endurance charges and 21 spirit charges, you look pretty cool. So for the gear, as I said, we use Light Poacher. This is obviously needed. You can get it with an enchant related to any physical spell you want, and or you can get it with any elemental leech as life corruption like the one I have. It's not mandatory, but if you do not get leech on that helmet, you can still get it with Doriani's Lesson from a cluster jewel instead. It doesn't really matter, but if you do get it on the helmet, you can save a couple points on your tree that way. I will say though that if you are using ethereal knives like me, I consider that enchant mandatory for smooth gameplay. If you're lucky, you can also get a Light Poacher with a +1 to maximum power charge corruption. I bought my helmet for 2 divines, and in it I socketed Archmage support for Spirit Burst not to trigger, and Herald of Ash in the other socket for clear speed. For the chests, and this is another massively important piece, we use Shroud of the Lightless. This chest gives us 3% increased maximum life and 4% elemental penetration for each Abyss Jewel, and we have 21. So this chest alone gives us 63% increased maximum life and 84% LA pen, which is pretty crazy. Getting it with 3 sockets like mine is better, but if it's too expensive, you can get it with 2 sockets and sacrifice 1 Abyss Jewel. This one cost me 8 divines, and in it I socketed Haste for speed, Zealotry for damage, and a level 3 Enlighten. For the gloves, we use Command of the Pit for the Arcane Surge on hit, which we also scale with the unique Abyss Jewel Kurgul's Gaze. And we obviously get the gloves as well for the 2 Abyssal sockets. Mine has a 0.5% crit chance corruption, but you can also get yours with ally weakness on hit, cast speed implicit, max life implicit, or frenzy charges implicit, whatever you can find. It can also just be uncorrupted if you want it cheap. I bought those gloves for 1 divine, and in them I put Flame Dash with Divergent Inspiration to make it cost 0 mana, but you can use any movement skill you want as long as you make it cost 0 mana. If you want your movement skill to do that, to cost 0 mana, you have to use a 2023 Divergent Inspiration. Alternatively, and this is the cheaper way to solve that problem, you can use life tap support to make your movement skill cost life instead of mana. For the boots, we use Bubonic Trail. This gives us movement speed and mana reservation efficiency so we can run our auras. And it gives reduced duration of elemental ailments on top of the 2 abyssal sockets. These boots, along with the Solipsism Keystone right here on the tree, together reduce the duration of ailments to 0 as long as the sum of the reduced duration of elemental ailments between the boots and Solipsism reaches 100%. That way, you can be immune to ailments except for ailments on the ground, so be on the lookout for that, even if you do cap your elemental ailment duration to 100%. I bought the boots for 100 chaos, and in them I socketed a level 1 precision supported by arrogance. The reason you want to do that is because you need to reserve life again for the agnostic to function. We need to keep our life at not maximum so that our mana keeps being drained. For the weapon, we use a one-handed with support mods for our skill. I have one that supports socketed gems with crit chance and crit damage, then 40% more spell damage, and +2 to level of socketed support gems for our empower. Try to get one with at least crit strike support or crit damage support, pardon me, if not both. And you can socket a support gem for the one you didn't get on the weapon instead of cruelty, which is what I run. 40% more spell damage and +2 to level of socketed support gems are really good to get, and I really would not compromise on the 40% more spell damage. For the Crucible passive trait, this weapon has a +2 to level of socketed spell gems, really good to get, and a level 10 Arcane Surge, which we have active thanks to our gloves. So this Crucible node does give the more damage component of Arcane Surge support. The +2 to level of socketed spell gems I would not compromise on. For the other node, it doesn't have to be Arcane Surge. It can be faster casting, calling strikes, faster projectiles, whatever you can find. I bought this weapon for 20 divines. It's more expensive than the other pieces, but it's not that much considering what it gives you. And like I said, you can always sacrifice damage to get it much cheaper. You could also set this build up with an Annihilating Light unique staff for super cheap. But then you would have to fix your resistances, you'd have to use a physical spell with an elemental tag, so you wouldn't be able to use ethereal knives with that setup. And if you're rich, you can also use a mirrored item to have really broken damage. In the weapon, we socket the spell we use, in this case EK, Cruelty, and a level 4 Empower. This makes our spell be level 30, it's huge. But if you don't have money for a level 4 Empower, a level 3 will do, no problem. For the shield, you use the Squire, unless you're using Annihilating Light. The shield is OP because it gives another 3 links to our main skill. I bought this one for 24 divines, and in it I socketed Power Charge on crit. For clear, I use Awakened Chain. For Uber Boss setup, I use Awakened Spell Echo. And then I have Divergent Inspiration. The shield doesn't need to have, you know, the max quality of socketed support gems, so in this case 8%. Just 5% will be enough alongside a 20/20 Divergent Inspiration to keep our EK mana cost to 0. For the rings, you want life and to cap your resistances with a free prefix, to craft 5% reduced mana cost. You need to put fertile catalysts on both of them to get to 6% reduced mana cost. This ring with the cast speed here cost me 6 divines, and the other one without it cost me 3 divines. For the amulet, you want plus to level of skills related to the spell you use, like physical, fire, whatever, and anything with crit multi, crit chance, whatever you can find. Do make sure though, just like the rings, that it has a free prefix to craft your 5% reduced mana cost. This amulet cost me 12 divines. For the belt, we use Darkness Enthroned. It gives us 2 abyssal sockets, pretty straightforward, and it gives us a lot of stats from them. I bought this belt for 40 chaos so that I could get a good roll on it, so you should try to get a good roll on it too. And don't forget to socket your best Abyss Jewels onto your Darkness Enthroned so that they can gain increased effect. Speaking of Abyss Jewels, you want life crit multiplier and cast speed when you dealt a crit on them. Cast speed is good too, just not as much. And then added physical damage to spells is good too, but it's really of a lower priority. The average Abyss Jewel costs between 30 to 50 chaos, and I bought all of them, so my 21 Abyss Jewels for around 600 chaos, just below 3 divines. Considering how much life and damage you get from all of these jewels, it's an insanely cheap investment. Just below 3 divines for 21 Abyss Jewels, again, 63% max life, 84% LA pen, just really good stuff. For the flasks, Writhing Jar is necessary if you want to do bosses. If you have a little section before you start the boss fight, you can pop the flask, kill the little worms that come out, and stack your spirit charges up that way. And you can do the same as the fight goes forward and maintain your spirit charges by killing more worms. Then, Bismuth with mana cost and increased effect. Make sure to enchant this with used at the end of the flask effect, as it will guarantee it's always up so you can cast your spell. Really important. If you craft used when charges reach full, it'll sometimes skip a second where you can't cast, as the minimum uptime of the flask is less than 100%. This is because the trader on our tree right here procs every 5 seconds, and the duration of the flask is 8.2 seconds. However, the average uptime is 100%, as you can check in POB, because the flask has 3 uses and the trader procs average out to be consistent over time. So if you craft used at the end of the flask effect, it will always be up. Then for your third flask, Quicksilver with movement speed, you can replace this one on Uber bosses. Maybe for another life flask, Blood of the Karwi is a good one, up to you. You can also craft Reduced Effect of Curses for quality of life when mapping, if you don't mind losing movement speed. For our passive tree, we are Scion. This is because we get Unleashed Potential with Forbidden Flame and Flesh. This is a huge part of quality of life of the build, and these Forbidden Flame and Flesh are really cheap to get. I bought them for 135 chaos. The node is amazing. It makes it so mapping is extremely smooth as we generate frenzy and endurance charges easily, since we have no space for blood rage. And they last an insane amount of time, meaning you don't drop them while charging Crucible, popping harvest crops, setting up expeditions, finding the last remaining packs of a map, etc. Thanks to Rhything Jar, you can also keep up all of these charges during boss phases by popping up your little worms. And you can even build up your power charges before starting an encounter with an Uber boss. As you can see though, on my shield, I use a Crucible node that guarantees me to gain a charge on kill to make sure that I never drop the frenzy charges on bosses. This is the reason why the shield was 24 divines, but you don't need to have it. The power charges will be kept up regardless because of the power charge on crit support that we socketed on the shield, and if you drop the frenzy charges, it's not the end of the world. With that said, they last 50 seconds, so you still have a really good chance of generating them and keeping them during boss phases, even without the Crucible node on the shield. Endurance charges don't really matter as long as you have your resistances capped without them, like I do. But if you want to make sure to keep your endurance charges to min-max damage reduction during bosses, you can get a node on the Crucible tree of the shield that gives you endurance charge on kill. Again though, not needed. Regardless, Unleash Potential still gives us +1 to maximum all charges and makes them last long enough that you never have to look at them, which is amazing. I'll also leave a POB in the description, maxed for people that do not want to use frenzy charges and do not want to take the chance of losing them during boss phases without the Crucible node. You can instead allocate Pathfinder for the Flask refill and Forbidden Flame and Flash, and Inner Conviction with Militant Faith for more damage. Make sure you check the POB if you choose this option, which is just as viable. We then grab for the Ascendancy, we grab Deadeye for Tailwind, so we can be fast, and we grab Assassin with more crit chance and elusive. This way we connect to Shadow on the tree. As you can see, the tree is designed to grab all the jewel sockets that you can. Right here, and including at the beginning. We grab these three around Scion, the Solipsism Keystone, and that last little jewel socket right up there. After that, we grab a lot of the life and damage nodes at the starting area of Shadow, and we socket Brutail Restraint here. This gives us the Traitor Keystone, Onslaught on kill for 8 seconds, which is crazy because it will be kept up even during bosses with Rhything Jar. I suggest to grab one that gives at least 20% increased Flask Charges gained so that you can have an easier time spamming Rhything Jar. This number, 6424, is a good one. It gives movement speed, life, Flask Charges gain, and Onslaught on kill. I will leave a list in the description with all the jewels that give both Onslaught on kill and at least 20% increased Flask Charges gain, so make sure to check that out. We then path on the upper area of the tree and grab all of the jewel sockets. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then after grabbing all of the jewel sockets, we grab all of the power charge related nodes. 1, 2, 3. Then we grab the crit nodes, this little wheel here, this little wheel here, and all of the life nodes that we see along the way. We go to the Agnostic Keystone, which we need for our build to work. And that is pretty much the tree. We also use 3 large cluster jewels to be able to socket more Abyss jewels. So 1, 2, and 3. And we get damage from the notables given by the cluster jewels. Sadist is great. Prismatic Heart can help us cap resistances. And then you want to make sure to have Doriani's Lesson in one of these if you did not have Leech on the helmet or elsewhere, like I mentioned earlier in the video. This build can be improved in a lot of ways. you can get a mirrored weapon. There are some insane ones out there. For something like the one I have right here, I will leave a POB for my current build in the description, and I will leave this level 100 POB with a mirrored weapon as well. You can also get perfect voices cluster jewels to get more jewels and go ludicrous with that. If you want to really give this build even more damage, you can use Petrified Blood with Arrogance instead of Precision, and then use Pain Attunement. This POB is in the description. You can also use Militant Faith with Inner Conviction and allocate Pathfinder for the Flask refill with Forbidden Flame and Flesh if you prefer this option over Unleash Potential and Frenzy Charges, like I described earlier. This POB is also in the description. You can also experiment with Inquisitor with the Instruments of Zeal node, and gain Fanatic charges by spamming Shield Charge to get reduced mana cost there and more cast speed. That way you can replace Divergent Inspiration with another damage support, and all of that while also being low life with Pain Attunement to get beyond 350 million Shaper DPS. I'll leave a POB in the description for that too. The only thing is you would have to make sure you spam Shield Charge. I don't really like that, so I decided to make my build be more quality of life instead. You can change this build in a lot of ways to fit your currency needs or your playstyle preferences. Besides the needed uniques, this is very much so a build that's dependent on what you want to do, as you can move things around. Either way, I was extremely satisfied with it. Lots of fun, very smooth gameplay, everything just dies quick. It's super, super fun. The final cost was less than 90 divines, but you could sacrifice damage to reduce it by a lot if you want to, or you can spend more to really gain massive damage with a mirrored weapon and better jewels. If you have any questions, feel free to pop in my stream where I will be playing this build for the next days. I stream from Wednesday to Saturday from 3 p.m. CEST until the evening, and sometimes Sunday. Thanks for watching, kisses, mwah, and have a good one. Bye bye!